upstairs at Froelich. Show 204, Reel 1.
Bing, what are you doing here? I thought I'd tell you to go fuck your mother.
Excuse me.
Dad, are you going to let me money or not?
My seats.
I know what you did. You're a damn pedigree. All right, just get the hell out of here, huh? I got a goddamn
Hey, the one thing you do care about. Okay, then I quit as your son.
This is Upstairs at Froelich, and we're talking about the Netflix movie that was premiered, 3 weeks ago around that time, but it'll be 2 months before this episode is released, so.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's The Irishman.
But we just wanted to talk about it because the funny thing is you and I are very divisive on this.
Yeah. I really didn't care for the movie, and you loved it. And it's a Martin Scorsese movie that he made, and it costs $150 million, and I don't understand why, because there's nothing about it that would cost $150 million for the cast.
It wouldn't have cost nowhere near as much if they would have just used younger actors and then prosthetics.
I don't know, but okay, why don't we start with why you like the well first, I mean, it's okay, it was directed by Martin Scorsese, yes, it premiered on Netflix, it did get kind of a perfunctory courtesy theatrical run, I guess, but it's gonna mainly get a lot of its notoriety from being on Netflix.
They wanted it to go to theaters. It was just that the theater chains wouldn't agree to the 70-day window. They wanted to do a 28-day window, and the theaters said no. So that's why it only ever went to independent operated theaters.
I can't even imagine. I mean, it's really not a big issue anymore because all of this stuff is kind of done on digital projectors, and you can have our hard drive for a month and then give it back to us and we'll put it out on the thing. But they didn't want to do that. Even from what I understand, the movie was shot on film for the most part. The digital effects or any sequences involving digital effects were shot digitally.
I will say from a technical standpoint, it was really weird watching this movie in 1.85:1 because Scorsese doesn't, because you got to figure with Scorsese, he hasn't shot in a flat ratio in a long time. I want to say since Goodfellas, he hasn't shot in a flat ratio. I guess that was one of my only complaints because, dude, you're making a $160 million movie and you're going to shoot it in fucking 1.85:1? That doesn't scream epic to me.
I was trying to figure out where that money went. And then, I had some thoughts in my head about Adam Sandler. Now he spent a lot of money and he basically didn't put any of it up on screen. I mean, this is a long movie. I wouldn't say it was a big movie though. It's a very kind of small movie with a long running time. That's how I felt, because it just felt like there were 3 or 4 people in a room at the most, if that. But it's mainly just about Robert De Niro's character.
There is one thing I think you've been wanting me to say about this, and something I haven't shared with you privately, so I will say this to at least give you some sense that I'm not crazy. I do not think this is Martin Scorsese's best film by any stretch. By any stretch of I love the movie, but I still don't think it's his best movie.
Well, that's beyond obvious. Scorsese is one of my gods. I mean, I love his work. I love most of his work anyway. I mean, the work previous to, I don't know what, Hugo. Or something like that. I mean, if I were to go
it
down...
always goes back to fucking Hugo with us.
I mean, the thing is, Hugo is one of those movies where I thought it wasn't great because it didn't really feel like Scorsese was there trying to, make a movie. I felt like it was a movie made by computers, and Scorsese was just sort of leaning over the computers and saying, okay, do this, do that, do this, do that. There's so many movies that he's done. But first, let's do what I was intending to do by just tell us what you thought of it. What of the movie.
What I loved about it the most was it had most of the Scorsese stamps all over it. It had the dialogue. Okay, right at the beginning when you see dude getting shot in the back of the head, that's automatically it's a Scorsese movie. It's going to have some of that hyperkinetic acting or hyperkinetic, cuts like a Scorsese movie would have. The acting was there. You had Bobby De Niro, you had Joe Pesci, you had freaking Harvey Keitel, and on top of that, you had Al Pacino, which, let's just both face it, he was the best part of the movie.
It's hard to tell. I think the best part of the movie was Joe Pesci. I think Joe Pesci was, I think he had the best performance, and he was doing something. It was something that my wife took note of. And she was like, wow, it's Joe Pesci, but he's not like screaming and yelling and acting like a psycho.
Yeah, he's very, very subdued, which is very, very weird for him because normally none of his performances are subdued. But at the same time, he's an older guy now.
Well, wait a minute.
You know,
what about With Honors? Remember With Honors, where he played a Harvard bum? He
I
was
love that.
kind of subdued in
That was him playing against type.
I'm a bum, but I'm a Harvard bum.
And then on top of that, dude, he already had the Oscar, so who cared what role he took after that? You know, I mean, he could have any role he wanted after that. But I mean, I loved With Honors. I love his role in With Honors. That was probably a very big departure for Joe Pesci. But it was a great role because he played the role believable. But in this movie, it was like, okay, the one argument that we had where I agree with you, the scene where Robert De Niro, Frank Sheeran, is beating up the shop store owner, that was just bad because it was young De Niro's face on 75-year-old De Niro's body.
Yeah, that was a major problem, was that they had apparently had this de-aging effect, which I really didn't see. It just looked like they dyed their hair, really, the actors. I didn't really see any kind of de-aging effects on the faces or anything, but that doesn't matter because you spend all that time trying to make these people look young. They don't really act young because they can't. A 70-year-old or 80-year-old guy cannot run around like a 40-year-old or a 30-year-old. All you have to do is kind of compare De Niro to, I don't know, what's a movie like from the 80s? Like, what's that? The King of Comedy.
Yeah, King of Comedy, or, oh God, De Niro in the 80s. You see, that's hard because he really didn't do a lot of movies in the 80s.
He didn't, but he did a few. He did a couple that are notable.
But you got Raging Bull.
Well, yeah, that was 1980.
But he was under prosthesis when he did that movie. Heavy prosthesis.
Well, he had a nose he had to have his nose look like Jake LaMotta's nose for some reason.
And then he gained that weight for the older.
There was, I mean, like, do you remember, say, The Mission with Jeremy Irons? He's running around. He's being all physical and everything. There was also Angel Heart, which we talked about, special appearance by, you know.
Oh God.
He just sits there, but mainly, I mean, like, the idea, you're talking about a remarkably physical actor. Hell, even Heat. In Heat, he's very physical. With Al Pacino running around, they're both physical. These are not the Al Pacino and Robert De Niro of Heat. These are two old Italian men.
But that harkens
like,
back
I'm going
to
to stand up now, and I want you to look at my pants, okay? Now tell me these pants are not the greatest pants you ever had. I'm going to turn around. It's going to take me about 30 seconds, but I'm going to turn around. Those are really good pants. Those are the best pants I've ever seen. Okay, that's how they were acting. They were acting like a couple of old men, you know?
They were, but that harkens back to a discussion that Scorsese had on one of the talk shows recently. He was telling Al Pacino, it's like, now look, you're playing 49-year-old Jimmy Hoffa. Okay, so he tells him to do this scene, and then he gets up all slow. He's trying to act out how Kennedy was when he got shot because he was all excited, jumping up and down. And Al Pacino, you know, he was playing his 79-year-old. So he was 79 when he was doing the role, but he had to play 49. Scorsese comes up and he says, Al, remember, you're 49 years old here. You have to play 49. He goes, okay, Marty, I got you. Then he does the scene. He looks at Marty and he says, 62.
62.
And then Marty's like, okay, 62. I'll take it.
Now you remember Al Pacino in Carlito's Way, running around like a maniac in Grand Central. He was probably older than 49, you know?
Yeah, he was 53 in Carlito's Way.
Yeah.
When he did that. He was 53.
And he's running around Grand Central Station, which is like one of the more exciting parts of the movie. It's a great movie. I love that movie. There's just certain things about the youth, and the being old betrays it if you're trying to do that. There would be nothing wrong with the idea of casting different people in the role. But the thing is, I don't think Scorsese gets $150 million from Netflix, and because of that, I don't get to watch Frasier anymore after January 1st because they paid for this. And they also paid for fucking Friends, too. Like, I need to fucking watch Friends some more. Like, they need to have the show on when it's on 15 other channels. I don't need to watch that.
See, I got the Friends box set on Blu-ray because I bought that for my wife years ago, so I don't give a shit.
I don't,
okay.
But the thing, I don't even need to watch because I really don't care for Friends. Really, it's something that my wife likes.
I know. There's a couple episodes I like. I honestly don't care for the show either, but I'm just saying. Like,
the thing is, if you're going to spend that kind of money, that's the reason why we don't get to keep our shows on anymore, is because money is being spent on this movie.
But it's also a double-edged sword because you got to figure this movie would have never been made if Scorsese couldn't have gotten those guys to do it.
I don't understand, because Scorsese is a guy who came from Roger Corman filmmaking. He knows how to make movies on low budgets. Every movie that he made, with the exception of, I want to say, New York, because they had cost overruns, Raging Bull because United Artists doesn't know how to handle a budget, up until probably, I want to say, Casino. This guy knew how to make low-budget movies, even Cape Fear, even Goodfellas, Last Temptation of Christ. Last Temptation of Christ he made for $4 million in Morocco and Israel. I mean, and that was a location movie.
And on top of that, he had 2 studios funding it, because he had Universal and Cineplex Odeon funding that one.
Yeah.
So at least when you made a risk, he made it. The reason he got that budget because that movie was risky as hell to make.
There was no way he's going to make it otherwise. He tried to make it in '83 and he couldn't. And
nobody, I mean, you after you watch the movie, you say to yourself, it's like, yeah, I can see why no studio. I mean, it's not a bad movie by any means, but I can see why no studio wanted to touch it.
Well, yeah, it's about a Jesus who has sex.
Exactly. It's kind of like it's the same thing with Passion of the Christ. No studio wanted to fucking touch that movie, so that's why Mel Gibson funded it himself.
Well, I get to talk about why I love Martin Scorsese's films. This is a guy I watched. I mean, he's another guy who all you have to do is look at his movies to get a film school education. And you see the kind of work he did. I mean, he started off, his first movie was Who's That Knocking at My Door, starring Harvey Keitel and Zena Bethune. And it's such an incredible movie to watch, considering that it was made in 1967, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to see the genesis of that kind of thought, that kind of spilled over into Mean Streets, you know? But Mean Streets, he did Boxcar Bertha for Roger Corman. He was able to. This was such an exciting time for filmmakers, not even just creative types of filmmakers in general, because there was so much of that language was out there, and it's that language that was killed around the time the Heaven's Gate came out. You know, we talked about Cimino, and Scorsese was he was a filmmaker who thrived on it, and he was also like an enormous drug taker. He had an enormous cocaine habit,
which showed on Taxi Driver because they all said that scene where he was in the back of the cab with Bobby De Niro, he was all coked out when he did that scene.
Yeah, great.
But then he fell victim to New Hollywood too because he wanted to do his. I mean, now unlike Cimino, Scorsese had several movies under his belt before he decided to do his big project, which was New York, New York. But then, of course, it flopped. You know, nobody wanted to see it. Hell, I haven't even watched it. Because I hate Liza Minnelli. I'm just going to fucking flat out say it. I cannot stand Liza Minnelli.
I like Liza Minnelli in maybe small doses, like Arrested Development, that kind of thing.
Arthur. That's it.
Arthur.
Like
when you get caught between the moon and New York City.
No, you got to ride like the wind, dude.
The best that you can do is fall in love.
But yeah, but
he did The Last Waltz too with Robbie Robertson working on it because it was the band and everything, and Robbie Robertson does the music on The Irishman. Robbie Robertson was a musician who was with the band. He lived with Robbie Robertson when he was thrown out of his house by either Liza Minnelli or Isabella Rossellini, or probably both. And the two of them had a horrible cocaine habit together, and they had to go through therapy counseling, and they had to separate because, you know, he was like his drinking buddy, but worse, he was his snorting buddy. So the both of them had like a cocaine problem. I mean, Martin Scorsese, a very passionate guy, and also one of these guys who just falls in love, and then I guess love kind of destroys him or something like that. It's a very romantic kind of a feeling to be a filmmaker like that, especially living in New York. And you're like, what? You're barely. If you point up to the sky, you're touching 5'5", and he's an asthmatic Italian. Every one of his films is kind of imbued with his presence in that way. He was one of these guys that hung around with those mob types, but he hung around with them and was friends with them because they would have killed him if he hadn't. You know. That's sort of how he did things, and so he's he's like one of a handful of filmmakers from New York who's able to really capture that vibe. If you want to know what life is like in New York,
watch Mean Streets.
Well, not Mean Streets. No, I wasn't gonna say Mean Streets because that's a very Italian movie. You don't always run into fucking low-level mob types or something. This is. If
true.
You want to know about the insanity of New York, you watch After Hours.
That was my next one.
That's the movie you watch, and people look at that. People look at that from your neck of the woods, or Peoria, or Los Angeles, or Nashville, and they say, "No way! People from New York can't act like this." Yes, they do. They absolutely do.
Now, the only gripe I have about After Hours, that is like the one Scorsese film that does not feel like a Scorsese film. That's a movie that feels like
I think it does.
Anybody could have done that movie.
There is a scene where Griffin Dunn is trying to escape from a building, and he's on a fire escape, and he looks across a courtyard, and he sees through a window into another apartment a woman who is killing a man, shoots him 5 or 6 times in the chest. And he looks at it and he says, I'll probably get blamed for that. Now that is a Scorsese moment right there.
I need to revisit that movie again. I really do. I haven't seen it in such a long time.
But kind of passion fuels it. And it's just like the same passion that fuels Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and The King of Comedy. And then, after Hours, he develops a little clout because I think that movie won the Cannes Film Festival or something, or it played there. Maybe it played out of competition, but he got a lot of notoriety for that. And Paul Newman picks him up and says, I want you to direct the sequel to The Hustler. So Martin Scorsese directs it. That gives him clout. And because of that, he's able to finally get Last Temptation of Christ made. And then he goes to Warner Brothers with the Goodfellas project with, what was his name? Nick Pileggi wrote the book, right? Wise guy.
Nick Pileggi.
And that becomes a huge hit and a big Oscar contender. And then he sort of becomes the Martin Scorsese with Cape Fear.
Now, but I was going to say about Cape Fear now, he wasn't going to do that originally. What ended up happening was he was originally supposed to do Schindler's List because Spielberg passed on it. Because Spielberg was supposed to make Cape Fear and Scorsese was supposed to do Schindler's List.
But then Scorsese was like, I'm not Jewish. I have no idea what I'm doing.
And then he said, Steven, you need to make this this He goes,
You're
I know
Jewish, Steve.
It's like, I know you don't want to make it because it's going to be hard for you to make, but you have to do it. And he said, I'll tell you, we'll trade. You can take Cape Fear. I'll do Schindler's List.
Was Cape Fear an Amblin production?
It is an Amblin production.
Right. Okay. So he does Cape Fear. Cape Fear is not one of my favorites. It's
I love Cape Fear because it's De Niro brings his A game to the fucking table at that movie. He is such. Again,
I think
we've said this a million times. Guy you'd love to hate.
Yeah,
okay?
but my problem with Cape Fear is it reminds me a lot of Silence of the Lambs. It's very over the top. It's very big. There's a lot of stuff you can like about it. You know what I really like about Cape Fear is none of his psycho crazy shit. I like his relationship with Juliette Lewis, who plays Nick Nolte and Jessica Lange's daughter. I really like that. Their chemistry is so good. That's where I felt the movie was genuine in that bit. I didn't like much of the other bit. I thought a lot of it was kind of like unsettling in a way that I don't even want to talk about.
Well, the unsettling part was where he's trying to hit on a freaking playing a 15-year-old Juliette Lewis.
Well, he tongue kisses with her and everything.
Yeah,
and
that's unsettling.
It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting. I'll give you that. It's interesting, but it kind of puts me off. It puts me off a lot of things.
It's one of those things. It's like, you're going for shock value here, Scorsese, okay? But, whatever works for you, man. It was still a good movie in my opinion. But then we move on to The Age of Innocence, which I have not seen.
The Age of Innocence is a story that I really enjoy the movie. I do enjoy the movie quite a bit because it's physical. And that was one of those things that Scorsese used to do. And then that's why a movie like Hugo really disappoints me because he's not physical anymore. Now he's got a computer doing all his camera work. There are crazy tricks that he used to do. He used to rig up devices. Like in Raging Bull, he rigged up this harness to attach to Robert De Niro and put a camera on it so that the camera was right with Robert De Niro. In After Hours, he rigged up a device to get the point of view of a bunch of keys being dropped on Griffin Dunn and then drop it from a 3-story window onto Griffin Dunn. Age of Innocence, he's got his camera running around all over the place. He's swooping and diving. He's got these crane shots. It's just magic watching the camera work in that movie. And he even does it with Bringing Out the Dead. Bringing Out the Dead was probably the last Scorsese movie I saw in the theater. Was it? No, I saw King of Comedy in the theater, but I saw that during an IFC festival that they showed 3 movies.
I saw Bringing Out the Dead at our local theater back in '99, around that time.
Yeah, we saw it on Halloween of 1999 in the movie theater. I loved the movie. I thought it was fantastic. It's another one of those very rare Nicolas Cage movies that I actually like.
Dude, you want to know what's even more sad? 20 fucking years it's been since that movie came out, right?
Yeah.
Where's the Blu-ray?
It's not on Blu-ray?
Where's the fucking Blu-ray?
That's interesting, yeah.
Seriously.
That to me is a fantastic
film. Say, fuck you, Paramount. Why isn't this movie on fucking Blu-ray?
Yeah.
It's sad that I'm still sitting on the DVD of this movie, and it should be on.
And it's actually, wasn't it one of the last Laserdiscs?
That and Sleepy Hollow were the last two.
No, that's an incredible movie. It got marginalized though when it was released.
It did
because everybody they were doing the same thing that I'm doing now with The Irishman.
It was the marginalization of the movie because Paul Schrader wrote it. Okay, they were trying to say, oh, it's just Taxi Driver in an ambulance.
But it wasn't though, because he doesn't do anything crazy. At the end of the movie, he just hugs Patricia Arquette. Just hug. Let's just hug for a little while, and then it fades out. It's like I thought it was a great film.
Ving Rhames was the best part of that movie.
Rise up,
I be banging.
And then after that, I did. My wife didn't enjoy it as much as I did, but I loved Gangs of New York. I thought it was fantastic.
Oh, I love Gangs of New York. I thought I was going to be disappointed in that movie, but I really, really liked it a lot. Cameron Diaz, though. Oh, fuck Cameron Diaz in that movie, though. Oh,
I think that's one of the reasons she didn't like the movie is because she doesn't really like Cameron Diaz and thought that they should have gotten a real like redheaded Irish woman to play the part, like maybe Heather Graham. Remember Heather Graham in From Hell? She should have been in that movie.
They could have picked any other actress off the fucking street to be in that movie, not Cameron fucking Diaz. I'm sorry, I cannot envision her as a street whore. I can't.
A street whore and Irish too. I don't know what you're doing over there. Oh, I'm gonna have sex with Leo DiCaprio. Anyway, and but Daniel Day-Lewis is wonderful in the film.
After that, though, we get the movie that I think Scorsese got robbed for, though.
Which
Aviator.
one? Oh, The Aviator. That was a fine movie. I enjoyed the movie too. That was another movie where I didn't really see the tricks. You know how they talk about the de-aging in Irishman? I didn't see it. They talked about all these weird tricks that Scorsese did by filming on different kinds of stocks to kind of simulate. Maybe it was whatever TV or whatever I was looking on, but I didn't really see that.
I don't know. I mean, you're saying that there were some de-aging techniques done in The Aviator?
Not in The Aviator, no.
In The Irishman?
In The Irishman.
Well, I caught several. One of the big ones, we segued out of that one so quick, but I had to play catch up, so I'm sorry. One of the de-aging tricks I noticed was where Robert De Niro is playing his older self in World War II, or Korea, whichever war it was. It was World War II where he was killing the Nazis.
Probably, World War II.
Where he was killing the Nazi soldiers and made them dig their own graves.
Yeah.
That was him de-aged. His face was totally de-aged. But
maybe I need to look at that again, but I don't know. He just seems to have that old man smirk.
No. The big standout though was Pacino. The de-aging on him, he looked. I'm telling you, dude, he looked like Pacino from fucking Son of a Woman.
Well, okay. Let's talk a little bit about The Irishman now, since that's what the episode's about. The Irishman is actually Frank Sheeran, right? Based on a book called I Heard You Paint Houses. And I Heard You Paint Houses is slang for I heard you kill people, you know? You paint them with your blood, you know?
And I do my own carpentry.
It's like you have a 3-hour movie, but there's no motivation. This is one of the problems I had watching it with my wife. I was like, there's no motivation for why he's doing what he's doing. Why is he trying to ally himself with the mob? Why is he in with the team? I feel like you just sort of picked up in mid-action. There's no motivation for a lot of what this guy's doing.
Well, I mean, I caught the motivation. I mean, the thing was he wanted to make more money for his family so he could have more kids, you know, and he figured the easiest way to do it was the fucking steal shit. We call it birth control. You don't have to have too many kids. It's Philadelphia. Philadelphia is really cheap, by the way. At that Philadelphia of the time I lived in, which was the early 80s, or late 70s, early 80s, I think. Well, let me see. I was born in Cincinnati. We moved over to Philadelphia in 1979. We lived all around Philadelphia for a little while. Went down to Tennessee for a year, came back up to Philadelphia, and then came up to New York finally. But I know that whole area. It's not a place that's really horribly expensive. The quality of life was very high back then. Not so much these days. All those neighborhoods are gone, which you don't really see in The Irishman. The neighborhoods, it's interesting how they managed to kind of recreate or restore a lot of those neighborhoods. Oh yeah, dude, the cinematography and everything in that movie was spot on. Anytime they went on location,
yeah, they did kind of a fine, what do you call it, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood treatment of it.
Oh yeah. I mean that it's sad that movie, those two movies are going to be in contention next year for the Oscars when it comes to like cinematography and set pieces and makeup and all that other stuff. I guarantee you it's a shoe-in for makeup though, for practical makeup or whatever they want to call it. Irishman's going to probably win.
Well, I mean, the thing is, there's nothing pretty to look at in that movie because these are old Italian broads or something like that, and they're sitting there smoking in their pantsuits, multicolored kind of orange, lime green stuff going on, and they all talk like, it's kind of like, you remember Lorraine Bracco's character in Goodfellas talking about the mobster wives,
Like
about how
they
ugly they looked
they
and
all
all
had
the
bad
makeup.
skin.
They all had bad skin, and then one of them spits on her own floor. I mean, it's like that. It's sort of like this is low-level mobster territory,
And
whatever it is.
And they were all named Marie.
The whole idea of it is that these mobsters kind of exist on the periphery, that they're not really part of your life. That's an interesting thing too. But De Niro already did that though. He did that with that movie he directed, A Bronx Tale, which I saw in the theater. In A Bronx Tale, you didn't talk about the mob guys. They were just sort of there. They wore a suit, they had a certain attitude, and they could fix things for you. And that's how it was in South Philadelphia. In South Philadelphia, where most of The Irishman takes place, you didn't talk about the mob. Nobody ever mentioned the mob. What we always called them were local politicians. Like, for instance, my mother had a bunch of parking tickets, and she went to her quote-unquote local politician and said, "Can you take care of these for me?" And the next day, it's like they're erased. It's like there's no problem or anything like that. It's like they take care of things for you, whoever these people are. But you never referred to them as the mafia. You never referred to them as Cosa Nostra. And these were actually decent people. A lot of them were decent people. It's very interesting. Harvey Keitel plays Angelo Bruno. Now, I was a kid when he got whacked, basically, and they had his picture in the newspaper. He got shot in the back of the head, and he was sitting in the front seat of a passenger seat, and his mouth was hanging wide open. He had a bullet hole in his head, and it was a very bloody scene, but they took his picture and they put it on every Philadelphia newspaper. It was like big news. It was pretty wicked, actually, the way it was.
I wish I would have been alive for that, because I never actually heard of Angelo Bruno until I saw The Irishman.
Angelo Bruno was he was the local politician. He was kind of a celebrity back in those days. Same with the Testas and everything like that. These were just names that floated around South Philadelphia for years. So it's kind of unusual for Martin Scorsese to be directing this movie because he's not a Philadelphia filmmaker.
No, he's
so
a
he
New York
doesn't really
filmmaker,
know.
like we
I mean,
were saying,
for me, Kat Dennings, who is from Philadelphia, is more qualified to do a movie about the Philadelphia mob because she grew up around that time too. She knows a little bit more about fucking Philadelphia mobsters because she's from Philadelphia. A lot of people are. But De Niro here, not De Niro, I'm sorry. Scorsese picks interesting material to go on, but I don't know if it's that incredibly interesting in these times because this is 2019 and we're talking about Jimmy Hoffa. And Jimmy Hoffa, the whole thing with Jimmy Hoffa was put to rest years ago. A lot of people just let it go. Never mind. He disappeared. Whatever. Maybe he was killed. Maybe he was whacked. They did an episode on Mythbusters about where Jimmy Hoffa was alleged to have been buried, like Giant Stadium. And they went in there with some kind of a machine to pick up sound waves under the grass in Giant Stadium to see whether or not Jimmy Hoffa was indeed buried there. They didn't find anything, by the way. And there's been so many different stories about who the fuck killed Jimmy Hoffa or whatever happened to him. This guy, Frank Sheeran, wrote a book, and he alleges that he was the one who pulled the trigger. And that not only that, but Jimmy Hoffa was one of his best friends.
Yeah. And what gets me is there's still people out there who have claimed to have killed Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah.
So how are you going to take Frank Sheeran's word at face value?
That's another problem there because it's like an old man. It's kind of like, I don't know. You remember the Johnny Depp movie Black Mass?
Yeah, Whitey Bulger.
About Whitey Bulger, and Whitey Bulger did horrible, horrible fucking things and whatever. But Whitey Bulger he wasn't really a mafia guy. He was just a hitman, He was like an Iceman. He just went out there and just killed whoever he wanted. Yeah, Whitey, my brother-in-law's pissing me off. It's like, okay, $200. It's like that. But with this, it's like this guy who is a member of the Teamsters because he hauls meat around. He gets into the good graces of the mafia by getting him a bunch of meat, and a truck disappears full of meat, and he gets into trouble. And then next thing you know, he's got a job working for the Teamsters, and he becomes Jimmy Hoffa's right-hand man.
Well, then you're skipping over the part about how he becomes a hitman, though, because there was the scene in the movie where there was this older Italian guy tells Frank Sheeran, "I want you to run these dry cleaners out of town because they're impeding on my business, and here's $5,000 now, here's another $5,000 once you get the job done." But then you come to find out that business is run by Harvey Keitel's character. And then that's when basically Harvey Keitel says, look, this is basically your get out of jail free card. You had no idea that these guys, that, you know, we own this place. We don't care what you do, but this is ours. But as a sign of good faith, you're going to have to do something for me if you want to stay alive.
Well, can you really buy, though, that De Niro is like this kind of naive upstart or something? He doesn't really sell it. I think what Scorsese was trying to do was replicate the formula of Goodfellas, where you have a young Ray Liotta. He kind of gets ushered into and they have him as a boy too. He's a boy when he comes up against mobsters, and they take a shine to him, and then he starts doing these small little jobs for the mobsters, and then he gets to be big or something like that. I feel like he's trying to replicate the formula and then the success of Goodfellas, and I don't think he can pull it off, because Ray Liotta's character is meant to be kind of like our view into it, and I can't look at De Niro in the movie and say he's our point of view for dealing with these characters. I feel like if there's a character that we identify with, it's probably the daughter, because if you notice, there's a lot of scenes there where he's trying to deal with his daughter on some level, and then and we even carry that through. It's a 3-hour movie. She has no dialogue. Anna Paquin is in this movie, who is a name and has one line of dialogue in this entire movie. And that, to me, is what was the most important part of it, was his inability to communicate with his daughter.
And because, like, as a younger kid, she even talks, but, like, when she's a grown and when it's played by Anna Paquin, she says nothing. All she does is just sit there in the wings, pining over Jimmy Hoffa about how much she loves him because he's like a member of the family. But yet Joe Pesci is closer to De Niro than Jimmy Hoffa is. And she can never get close to Joe Pesci's character. She can never do it. Yeah. And it's just so.
I found that really unsatisfying. I found that part of it unsatisfying, because that's what I wanted to know more about. I wanted to know why his daughter felt the way she did, and having other people explain her motivation is not really good for me. You know.
I mean, I guess in hindsight, did this movie need to be 3.5 hours long? No.
It didn't need to. Well, I mean, if there was a little bit more going on in it, rather than just people kind of, hey, what are you doing here? Come on, hey, sit down. Let me get you a cannoli. You want a cannoli? You want a little bit of espresso? Okay, we're gonna have a conversation about mob stuff, and then you're gonna get up and walk out, and then we're driving in a car to another place where hey, come on down, sit down. You want to have something to eat? Hey, you know, it's like a lot of people just coming into rooms and sitting down and having polite Italian conversation. There should have been a little more. There was no energy to it. I said this to you before. I probably said it to a few other people. It's a movie that feels like it was directed by an old man about old men. That's fine, but does it have to be 3 hours long? Because I kind of felt like I lost a few years watching it. It could have been 2 hours long and been about the most important thing. We don't really need this guy's life story. All we need to know is what he did. And even then, that goes on, because Jimmy Hoffa, at this point, nobody cares. Nobody cares and also it was an anticlimactic kind of a way that they revealed it, because let's pretend you know nothing about this movie and you're sitting down and watching it, right? You're starting to get an indication, oh, Jimmy Hoffa. Yes, I've heard about him. Think about it as a younger generation, not even as your age, but somebody 10 years younger than you. Like, oh, Jimmy Hoffa, right. Yeah, he died under Mr. Oh, my God. Wait a minute. Are you telling me this is the guy who... And then he pops him twice in the head or something in that room. And the weird Joe Pesci kind of echoing Goodfellas moment where he goes, oh no, and it feels like someone's about to get hit, and you're like, oh my God, this guy killed Jimmy. Okay, well, there it is. So it's not going to mean much to younger people, and I don't even think it's going to mean that much to older people, because like you said, so many people have said how Jimmy Hoffa died. So many people have confessed to killing him.
So, I mean, I agree with you. It's very anticlimactic. I mean, you're making, as a great man named Gene Siskel once said, you're making me twist my thumb here.
Well, okay, let me just get to the end of the movie where he's talking to the priest. Now, that to me is a Scorsese moment.
Yes.
Where he's talking to the priest, he's like, don't rat me out, Father. This is what I did. And he's like, well, do you feel bad about what you did? And he's like, well, I could have gone either way. I did it or I didn't do it. I could have gone my whole life without doing it. Yeah, but do you feel remorse about what you did? Well, I don't know. What is remorse, you know? He's like, remorse is when you feel bad about doing something bad. And he's like, well, I don't know. What do you think? You know, it's It's kind of unsatisfying in that way because when I was watching that scene, I was thinking back to Mean Streets, where Harvey Keitel puts his hand over a flame in a church, and he's reminding himself the flame I'm feeling here is nowhere near the kind of flame I would feel in hell. And he's touching it, and he takes his hand away from it. That, to me, is a physical action. It's a physical acting going on. And there's something in Keitel's eyes in that scene that tells you he is capable of experiencing and understanding what remorse is, what doing terrible things might be, and what doing terrible things might do to your eternal soul. There's a lot more Catholicism in Mean Streets. Less Catholicism. It's kind of going through the motions. Catholicism.
Oh yeah.
In
Irishman just when it goes through the Catholicism part, it goes straight through the motions. No exposition, no nothing.
But the scene with the priest was interesting though, in that way.
That was interesting. I mean, I'm just gonna say it like you said. The whole movie was pretty much anticlimactic, especially the end, because I would have. It had a closed ending. The ending was okay, but how does it compare to other Scorsese endings? Well, nowhere near as good.
Oh man, I don't even want to think about that. That's depressing. Most endings, I have a kind of, there's a lot of movies that even have a Scorsese ending without being directed by Scorsese. And I'm going to bring up one for you right now, and it's going to bring up bad memories. Boxing Helena has a Martin Scorsese ending. Now, let me tell you what the Martin Scorsese ending is. It's Julian Sands waking up from his dream and saying, I still can't stop thinking about her. That's a Martin Scorsese ending, but it's in a really terrible movie. There's plenty of like this kind of Martin Scorsese stuff. I know now you're thinking of Julian Sands, right?
No, I'm trying not to. Believe me, I'm trying not to. But you're not helping the cause any.
But that's part of his passion, was that process. And when you're watching a Martin Scorsese movie, you sort of feel like he's in there, like he's living the lives of the characters. I don't quite know what's going on in The Irishman. I feel like The Irishman is like something else. It's like a high-profile project about mobsters that Martin Scorsese attached himself to and got. I saw a GQ interview. It was a GQ video on YouTube, a discussion between De Niro and Pacino, and they were talking about Martin Scorsese. First, they talked about their bitter rivalries that they had because they were young actors and they were both working in New York at the same time. And one person would lose one part to another person. Like, for instance, Robert De Niro really wanted to do Panic in Needle Park, but Al Pacino got the role. He even called the producers. He called the writer, Dominic Dunn, and he said, please don't give the part to Al. I can do this part. They both did Shakespeare in the Park. Robert De Niro was being considered for Scarface because he worked with Brian De Palma previously.
Yeah, 3 times.
But then Pacino got the part. Whatever they did, they were like really like incredible actors back when they were younger and everything. So whatever they did was going to be good no matter what. It was back at that time when they could do no wrong.
But you see, here's the one thing we can talk about now when you bring up De Palma. This is the one point. Unlike De Palma and unlike Coppola, Scorsese, no matter what, has still been able to persevere and churn out good movies, no matter how good, bad, or indifferent they are.
Right. Well, that's because Scorsese is good at. He just wants to make his movie. He's obsessed with making his movie, and he's not going to stop until he got to make Last Temptation of Christ, and he got to make Gangs of New York. He had those projects prepped for years. It took forever to get them made, but he got them made. Coppola, I don't know what Coppola's deal is. De Palma, I don't know what his deal is.
I'm gonna be brutally fucking honest with you. Okay, I am not the biggest fan of Bram Stoker's Dracula. I never have been a fan of that movie. Okay,
I saw it twice. I actually saw it twice in the theater. Once with a date and once with my mom, I think.
I will go on record and state you this right now. The last good movie that Francis Ford Coppola made was Tucker, A Man in His Dream.
Tucker, that's not a bad movie.
That's a great fucking movie.
It's an okay movie. He did another one. Oh God, not Jack. The one that was
Rainmaker.
Yeah, the one that was based on Grisham. Yeah, he made that movie. That was okay. I did enjoy Dracula. What I enjoyed about Dracula, though, was mainly the cinematography and the editing. Technically, it was an incredible movie because it was one of the last movies made with bare hands.
Now you go back to De Palma. Can you even name me the last good movie De Palma made? Because really, I'm at a loss.
The last good movie De Palma made. Let me see.
See, it's a trick.
I didn't like Black Dahlia. I enjoyed Femme Fatale, but it was nowhere near as good as
Femme Fatale was a porno with a plot.
I don't know. There was something about it that was kind of fun. That's really all I can consider. Maybe
I will go far back to say Raising Cain was the last good De Palma movie.
That's a tough one. You know what? I did enjoy the first Mission Impossible.
No, I didn't.
I liked it.
That was De Palma working a little bit too outside of his comfort zone because he had never done like an action movie like that before. You know, Scarface is not, I don't consider Scarface like that kind of action. I'm talking like action espionage. You know, that's something De Palma never really did. At least
well, let me see. I mean, like, you know, he's done some unusual movies of recent. Black Dahlia, Femme Fatale, Mission to Mars I didn't see, with Gary Sinise in it. Snake Eyes also with Gary Sinise I didn't see, but I heard it was okay.
Okay, you know what? Take
Carlito's Way. Hello, Carlito's Way came out after Raising Cain. So
there we go. All right, there we go.
He did. You know, and even then, I mean, Bonfire of the Vanities and stuff like that. Raising Cain, Carlito's Way, Mission Impossible were 3 movies that he did: 92, 93, and 96.
But you see, that's the common thread here. The common thread here with De Palma and Coppola is they haven't done good movies since the 90s. Okay, Scorsese was still churning out good movies. So even though The Irishman is not the best work he's ever done, I mean, again, in my opinion, it is not the best work he's ever done, but it's far from the worst.
I just want to know where that money went.
Again, they'll tell you the money went in the special effects. It went in the de-aging. That's what they say. That's where the money went because they had to use 3 different fucking cameras. And when you use that many different cameras and that much different editing, the costs are going to go through the roof. That's what they say. Do we want to believe that? I don't know. That's up to us. If we want to believe it, cool. If not, oh well.
Well, let's consider how much the Titanic cost.
Oh, how much did that cost to make back in 97?
And how all of the money they put into it is on screen. I mean, like I said, this is a bunch of old men sitting down and having conversations for $150 million. Titanic was made by 2 studios, and it cost $200 million.
Okay, so that it costs a lot more money to make than The Irishman. A lot more. And that's $1997. Okay,
but how much would Titanic cost today, though? I mean, knowing what we know and the kind of visual effects we can achieve, it might even cost half that. You could probably make that movie and just put everything in computers.
You could make it for a lot less. You probably
considering, I mean, like, you don't have the kind of cast budget. This is De Niro, it's Pacino, and it's Pesci, and it's to a lesser extent Harvey Keitel and a number of other people.
Ray Romano. Not count out Ray Romano. He was great in this movie.
Oh, Ray Romano, right? Yeah, he played a lawyer. He played the Ben Stiller part, basically. But it was interesting to see him in it. But Titanic did not have like a big cast budget or anything like that. All of that money was put into production design and visual effects. That's where it all came from. And they told him, Cameron, if you go over budget, we're going to ruin you. And he did go over budget twice, but the movie wound up being enormously profitable, one of the biggest hits ever. And there's no way to measure what kind of money. I know Netflix gets quite a bit of money from subscriptions, but
they keep adding more and more subscribers. But the reason they're doing stuff like this is because now they have to compete with all these other streaming services.
They know that Hulu isn't going to be financing a big budget Scorsese film or something like that.
I mean, right now you got to figure they're like, when you talk about streaming services that are making their own movies, you're competing with Amazon Studios, you're competing with Hulu Studios. Disney Plus is going to has their own movies on there now. You look at The Mandalorian, okay, and I haven't even watched an episode yet. I'm waiting for it to finish before I binge it. But you look at how popular that show has become in the weeks that it's been out. That show is getting subscriber after subscriber. That show could have been on Netflix, for Christ's sake.
It could have been, but we've got Disney now competing for that market share. As far as The Mandalorian is concerned, I only have one thought about that. It's not terrible. That's really all I have to say about The Mandalorian. It's not terrible. You can pretty much be assured that it's better than Last Jedi.
Good to know. Good to fucking know.
But it tries too hard to be Firefly. Just saying. Anyway, but I guess we should probably wrap it up on our final thoughts of The Irishman. Like I said, you know what I really want? I want for Martin Scorsese to pick up a 16mm camera and just take it outside and make a movie with no money, because I think that's how filmmakers thrive. Filmmakers thrive creatively when they have very, very little money. They have to start getting creative about what they do and having a good time. And a blank check is not good. It's not good for a filmmaker to have. It's
I mean, luckily, history is not going to repeat itself with this movie. You know, Mike Cimino, like we talked about before. You know, the whole blank check scenario. Luckily, this movie is getting lauded. This movie is getting all the hype and all this other stuff. We at least see it for what it is. We don't think it's the greatest movie ever made. You to a lesser extent, but. You know, like you said, I wish, you know, I'm luckily enough Scorsese's going to go back out and he's going to go make another movie with DiCaprio, and we all know it's going to be a good movie. You know, because hey, I'm sorry, him and DiCaprio, you can't go wrong. You can't.
He's DiCaprio did a fine job for him.
Every movie DiCaprio's done has been amazingly good. Even Shutter Island. I love Shutter Island, and I think that's one of the finest, most underrated Scorsese films ever made. And it doesn't get talked about a lot. It really doesn't.
It doesn't. As a matter of fact, it's in my bargain bin at Best Buy.
Yeah, I mean, I bought that Blu-ray the day it came. I saw that movie in theaters the day it came out. I bought the Blu-ray the day it came out because I loved it so much. It had one of the best twist endings ever. It was DiCaprio at his finest. It was everybody was on the top of their game, and yet the movie did well. That's the best part. But then now time hasn't been kind to it. Nobody talks about it.
I think actually, you know, it's funny because I know I go on about Hugo, how I didn't much care for it, but it did have that element, that kind of element of a childlike innocence about it, and it really worked to its favor in that way. I will give it that. I just thought the story wasn't much to go on because they were making such a big deal about it. That's another problem too.
I mean, what I liked about it was the movie subverted my expectations because what it ended up being about it was the story of another filmmaker, of a filmmaker lost in time. Granted, it was done over the top. The core was
mad over the top. If you know, this movie should have been directed by Spielberg. I felt like it was Martin Scorsese directing a Steven Spielberg movie. You know, it had that magic to it.
Yeah, I can agree to that. I mean, I still love Hugo though, even though it did not feel like a Scorsese movie. I still loved it. I thought it was phenomenal. You didn't, but you know, it's at least you didn't like hate it.
But it was too much of a whisper. That's my final thought. In the introduction to a Scorsese book that I have, Steven Spielberg wrote the introduction, and he said, "My movies are whispers. Marty's movies are shouts." And that's what Scorsese should be doing. He should be shouting. You know, I don't want to see him whispering. I want to see him shouting and being, you know, frenetic little Italian man running around with his inhaler, telling people to do things. You know.
And can we honestly say the last movie he did like that was possibly The Departed?
Maybe. I'll give you that.
Possibly, because I mean, I'm not gonna say it's because he won the Oscar. I'm just gonna say it felt like an old school Martin Scorsese movie.
For me, I would say Gangs of New York. I would go farther back and say Gangs of New York.
I'll agree with that. How about we just both say those were like the last? I mean, Shutter Island's a different level of Scorsese, but in the case of hyperkinetic, running around asthmatic Scorsese, we can at least say that it's both Gangs of New York and The Departed.
When Scorsese showed George Lucas his sets for Gangs of New York, George Lucas took one look around and he was like, "Yeah, it's very impressive, but you could do all of this on a computer now, Martin."
That's how you, and that is how you end the episode.
All right. Thanks for listening, and remember, if you're talking to me, you better be talking to me. I don't see anybody else around here, so you must be talking to me. Good night.
Oh, before we say good night, you forgot. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to share. And if you like what you hear, hit the subscribe button.
Fuck. Good night.
Good night.
Peppermint mocha. I hope this is as good as it looks. It's been naturally flavored and it's chocolate and minty. But anyway, we're talking about Martin Scorsese in this episode. And here we have, I bought this maybe last year. I think it might have been last year. Around this time. Martin Scorsese collection. It's only DVD. It might have a Blu-ray thing. I'm not really sure. Can you show the step box there? This is only his movies that he made for Warner Brothers. So it's basically Goodfellas, After Hours, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Mean Streets, and Who's That Knocking on My Door. Mean Streets and Who's That Knocking on My Door are, can we see the spine? The final releases. So I'm guessing what happened was around the time this collection was put together was around the time they were able to acquire the rights to Who's That Knocking at My Door, as Warner Brothers now owns that property, because it's the last number on the list there. You can see 19128, and they already had the rights to these other titles.
it's pretty bare bones. There's a couple of discs here that have commentary. I believe Mean Streets and Goodfellas have commentary, but everything else is kind of bare bones. Actually, who's that knocking on my door? Might have. Let's take a look at. Pull all of them out there. Yeah, there's some commentary there by Martin Scorsese and his assistant and former classmate, Martin. And let's just scroll through the rest of these here. Has Mean Streets, great cover, love it. I wish I had the Warner clamshell of this, I don't. I have another version of this on DVD that's that snap case, but this is the conventional DVD case. All right, next one, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. We talked about Chris Christopherson, how he's a great leading man, and this was like his only real successful attempt at being a leading man in this movie. Great story about that was that Ellen Burstyn wanted Coppola to direct the movie. Coppola said, I really can't do it. I'm working on other some things, you know, Godfather and stuff. I'm sucked into this contract. I recommend Martin Scorsese. So she sets up a meeting with Martin Scorsese, asks him, what do you know about women? And he just looks at her and honestly says, nothing, but I'm willing to learn. She liked that answer and hired him. Okay, next one. After Hours. This is one of my favorite movies of all time, not the least of which is my favorite Scorsese movie. It might be my favorite Scorsese movie because it's just so wacky and just so bizarre and odd. It's basically like a total male nightmare, this movie, because every one of his problems is pretty much caused by a woman. Anyway, moving on. We have Goodfellas. This is the classic one. This is the one that Scorsese has been trying to replicate the success of for years with Casino and The Irishman. Can you turn that around? I think that has special features on it. No, it absolutely... Oh, yeah, no, it does. It's a 2-disc thing, and it has all kinds of commentary tracks and behind the scenes and getting made and Joe Pesci and... what the fuck is this world coming to? Anyway, it's a very nice, attractive set, and I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you on the other side.